This is the Nightly Business Report, made possible by Digital Equipment Corporation, with its new generation of VAX family computers, connecting headquarters, branch offices, production and research centers into a single integrated computing environment. Digital has it now. By Kidder Peabody, for over 120 years, one of the world's leading investment firms, serving the financial needs of individuals, corporations, and governments. Kidder Peabody, professionalism worldwide. And public television stations across the nation.
Good evening, everyone. Linda O'Brien is off tonight. The chairman and president of Japan's Toshiba Corporation today resigned their posts a day after the U.S. Senate voted to ban sales of the electronic firm's products in the United States for at least 2 years. In resigning, the two executives implored Congress not to penalize the company for the actions of its subsidiary, Toshiba Machine, whose sales of technology to the Soviet Union allegedly jeopardized Western security. But Washington correspondent Bob Friedman reports that additional moves against Toshiba appear to be in the works on Capitol Hill.
House members engaged in Toshiba bashing today to protest the firm's sale of technology to the Soviets, and they urged U.S. consumers not to buy Toshiba products.
Banning Toshiba from the American market by a voluntary effort by American consumers will be a very effective deterrent to other companies that would sell out the West.
The Pentagon says U.S. ability to track Soviet subs has been damaged by the technology sold by Toshiba. Defense experts say it will cost the U.S. $30 billion to make up the lost ground.
The only way we can keep track of submarines is by sonar and noise. And this technology transfer has reduced the noise level of Soviet submarines by a factor of 20.
Toshiba sells TVs, VCRs, and photocopiers in the U.S., netting the firm $13 billion a year. But a Senate-passed bill now headed for the House would ban sales for 2 to 5 years. A House bill would also prevent the Defense Department from writing new contracts with Toshiba and Kongsberg of Norway, who also sold the Soviets technology. The two firms sell missile parts to the U.S., and legislation has also been introduced to require Toshiba and Kongsberg to pay the U.S. damages. The sale of submarine technology by the two firms to the Soviets violated export control laws under a NATO co-compact. And while the Commerce Department would like to handle the matter through diplomatic channels, Commerce Secretary Malcolm Baldrige today offered the Senate bill some support.
This bill is the best of all the bills we've seen, however, because it does give the president enough flexibility so that if the Japanese government were to strengthen very strongly their controls, their cooperation with COCOM, it allows him to waive the provisions of the bill.
Toshiba says the resignation of its two top executives was meant as an apology to the U.S. And this afternoon, the company released a statement reaffirming earlier plans for an independent internal investigation that will later recommend corrective action. Toshiba also says that the subsidiary that sold technology to the Soviet Union will eliminate the division that sells to the communist bloc. In Washington, Bob Friedman for the Nightly Business Report.
After being indicted for its former practice of disconnecting odometers from some new cars while they were tested, Chrysler today announced measures to avert possible damage to its reputation. At a news conference, Chrysler chairman Lee Iacocca said the company would extend the warranties of an estimated 60,000 cars involved in those tests. In addition, Iacocca said the company would replace 40 vehicles that were damaged in the testing program. Although Iacocca said those measures would cost a bundle, he said the company had little choice.
All of us at Chrysler have broken our backs to get this company where it is today. And no matter how hard we worked, we would have died in our tracks without the confidence of our customers. We asked them to trust us, and they did. And now they've been given a reason to question that trust. Simply stated, that's unforgivable, and we've got nobody but ourselves to blame.
However, Iacocca denied that the company had done anything illegal by disconnecting odometers during the testing process. As he put it, the only law we broke was the law of common sense. Paul?
Oh, I'm glad they weren't testing the brakes. Chrysler stock moved up a quarter to 34 3/4, incidentally. Yesterday's 28 1/3 point tumble in the Dow Industrial Average was its worst loss since it fell 37 1/3 points back on May 19th. and because many traders were afraid the sell-off may have marked the end of the summer rally and the beginning of the summer doldrums on Wall Street, selling pressures dominated on the New York Exchange opening today as the Dow fell another 14.5 points by 11 a.m. as losing stocks took a 7-5 lead over gainers. The market was also suffering from the absence of those end-of-quarter institutional window dressing purchases that helped it set a record high of 24.51 on the Dow last Thursday. But over the midday hours, prices showed some recovery when no heavy volume developed during the early sell-off, and the mood was also helped by a steady U.S. dollar. At 1 p.m., the industrial average was down only 5.5 points, with losers leading gainers by an 8-5 margin. The market remained at its 1 o'clock levels in mid-afternoon as activity slowed ahead of the long 4th of July holiday weekend. But at 3 p.m., the Dow trimmed its loss to little more than 4 points. The upturn was kind of nipped in the bud by the last hour increase in selling pressure, and the Dow Industrial Average proceeded to fall to a closing loss of 8.77 at 2,409.76. Not a very promising start for the second half of the year. Theoretical high, 2430.80, and the low well below 2,400 level. Trading volume today moved down 8.5 million shares from yesterday's pace and about 18 million more shares of down volume than up volume. The Dow Transport's off 2.63. Utilities managing a gain of 0.05. The Dow 65 off a little over 2.5 points. The closing tick, a plus 114, indicating some firmness on the closing bell. Standard & Poor's 500 off just over a point, nearly a 1.5 loss on the 400. The 100 down 1.11, and the SPOC 250 lost about 2/3 of a point. New York Stock Exchange Index down 0.55. NASDAQ off 0.21. The value line down 0.60, and the Wilshire 5000 lost at just about 8 2/3 points. The bond market was already in a holiday mode today, with most of the big traders sidelined, but a little last-minute institutional window dressing helped some of the issues edge higher, and a slight drop in the Fed funds rate at one stage prompted some buying, but by the close the market was flat. Long-term treasuries showing a closing gain of 3/32. Over in the corporate market, no change at all in the GMAX. Shearson Lehman Long Treasury Bond Index down just about 1.25 points. The Jacksonville Municipals unchanged at 88 7/8 bid. And finally, Fed funds at one point down as low as 6 1/4, but closed at 6 7/8. I'll be back shortly to show you where the action was on Wall Street today.
On the precious metals markets today, gold prices slipped while platinum and silver rose. On the New York currency markets, the dollar fell against the yen but gained against the mark and Swiss franc. The Canadian dollar also rose against the greenback, while the British pound steadied. And oil prices climbed in New York but fell in London. In a major defeat for senators from energy-producing states, the Senate today voted to delete from its trade bill a provision giving the president broad powers to boost domestic oil production. The provision, which was opposed by senators from energy-consuming states, would have required the president to take steps to lower American dependence on foreign oil if imports exceeded 50% of domestic oil demand. Opponents claimed that provision gave too much power to the president. Also on Capitol Hill, a House-Senate Conference Committee today reached agreement on a new banking bill. Among other things, the bill prohibits non-bank banks created after March of this year and bans new bank services through next March. The bill also authorizes $8.5 billion for the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation, which now is technically insolvent. Senator Phil Gramm says that provision should make it possible for both savers and S&Ls to rest a little easier.
This recapitalization of FSLIC now is a firm guarantee to depositors and savings and loan associations all over Texas and America that those deposits up to the insured limits are safe. We set out a concrete program of forbearance that allows savings and loans to, under these new guidelines we've established, to begin to build up their capital, to work themselves back in the black.
Although the bill must still be ratified by both houses of Congress and signed by the president, Gramm says he has no doubt the measure will soon become law. He says the president will sign the bill, even though he opposes some of its provisions. Well, 4 months after suspending payments on its foreign debt, Brazil has decided to extend the action to loans from other governments. The Brazilian government says the new suspension is intended to defend the country's foreign reserves and is not an attitude of aggression toward its creditors. Today's move covers some $1 billion of principal falling due on loans from a group of governments known as the Paris Club. Brazil says it will continue to pay interest on those loans. No matter what I do, I can't get my banker to accept those terms.
Get a Brazilian banker. Let's have a look at the closing Dow once again. In review, we see a loss of 8.77 today, and declining issues led advancers by exactly 200 issues. 48 new highs for the year, nevertheless, and only 17 new lows. Topping the active list for the second day running today on about 3.7 million shares, Santa Fe Southern Pacific up another 1 7/8 after rising nearly 4 points yesterday. The company is now thinking about selling off either one or both of its railroad units since the ICC won't allow them to merge, and there's a lot of interest there. American Telephone gained a half, the company assuring investors that second quarter earnings will be better than last year's 37 cents a share. Then a new issue, MBIA, a corporation that insures municipal bonds. It came public at a price of $23.50 and then fell 1.5. Not a very warm reception. Pacific Telesis was unchanged. Mattel, fifth in volume, rose a half. Hospital Corporation of America lost 3/8. General Electric off 5/8. Burlington Northern, which was a 4-point gainer last year, down to yesterday, I should say, down 2.5 today. Burlington Northern has expressed interest in buying parts of Santa Fe Southern Pacific. Hanson Trust up 1/4 point. It's one of Shearson Lehman's 10 uncommon stock values. Every July 1st, they come out with that selection, and Dean will have the rest of the list for you later. IBM was up 1/4 tenth in volume. Among widely held issues, AMR, its American Airlines unit today completed the acquisition of Air Cal. Stock nevertheless down 1 1/4. EF Hutton up 2 3/8 on renewed takeover talk. Exxon down 1 point. Oil's yielding recent gains. And General Motors was down 1 3/8. A poor performance this week for GM. NWA, parent company of Northwest Airlines, was off 1 3/4 in that weak group. And Penn Central moved up 2 points. Eugene Peroni, technical analyst at Janney Montgomery Scott in Philadelphia, recommended the stock. Reichhold Chemical was up 2 3/8. The company has rejected Dynippon's $52.50 a share buyout bid. It says it has other interested parties. Service Corp International up 1.5, and Baker Hughes up 1 1/4. These are 2 more of Shearson Lehman's 10 uncommon stock values. Financial Corporation of America down 7/8. The company says it's going to have around a $200 million loss because of the recent increase in its loan loss reserve. And Stifel Financial down 1 3/4. The company has rejected Laidlaw, Adams, and Peck's $15 a share buyout bid. It was subsequently withdrawn. Pilgrim's Pride was down 1 1/4. The company said it expects lower third quarter earnings due to a drop in poultry prices. And Unitro down 1 1/8. Late today, the company said it expects a third quarter loss. Over the American Exchange, a loss of 0.22 in the market value index. Trading volume down about 5 million shares from yesterday's pace, and about 25 more issues losing than gaining. Wix topped the active list, showing no change, followed by Gulf Canada D stock, no change. Blocker Energy lost 3/8, while prepaid legal gained 3/8. And then Timberland, a company that went public at 14 yesterday, down 1/4. It's a footwear manufacturer. O'Keefe Copper up 1 5/8. Several major copper producers raised prices significantly today. Audiovox Corporation down 2 1/8. The company reported excellent quarterly earnings, however, 30 cents versus last year 19 cents. I guess it's selling on the good news. NASDAQ trading a loss of 0.21 in the index. Trading volume, look at that volume, 213.8 million shares, way over the big board's level. And we verified the figures, so it was extremely active. And about 150 more or 60 more issues losing than gaining. The 100 index gaining 0.47. Amgen, the volume leader, tumbling 6.5 points. The company failed to get a patent on erythropoietin. It's a particular drug that controls the production of red blood cells, good for anemia treatment. The one that won it, we'll see in just a moment, that got the patent. Intel up 1.5 on predictions of higher second quarter earnings. Sun Microsystems received a major government contract and moved up 1 3/8. Liz Claiborne down 7/8. Seagate Technology off 5/8. Apple Computer dropped 1/2, so did Genentech. Mobile Communications A, no change. Jiffy Lube down 1/4, and Apollo Computer 10th in volume off 1 point. Now we see the company that won the patent on erythropoietin, Genetics Institute, up 4 3/4. GranTree Corporation up 1 5/8. It's accepted a $10 a share buyout bid from G Acquisition Corp. And Godfrey Company down 3.5. It's accepted a stock swap buyout bid from Fleming Company, but that's only worth about $30 on Fleming stock. So that's why it tumbled today. And that's our Wall Street wrap-up.
Thanks, Paul. The Treasury Department today marked the 200th anniversary of the U.S. Constitution by issuing 2 commemorative coins. In a ceremony at the Philadelphia Mint, Treasury Secretary Baker struck the first of what could be up to 10 million silver Constitution coins with a face value of $1. The Treasury will also issue up to 1 million gold coins with a $5 face value. The coins may be ordered at a discount price from the U.S. Mint this month before they go on sale at retail stores and financial institutions in August. Although the 1988 presidential election is still some 16 months away, the road to the White House is already getting crowded. Recognizing the primary role the president plays in economic and financial affairs, over the next several Wednesdays, we will take the opportunity to sound out the various Democratic and Republican candidates on those issues in a series of on-the-record interviews. Kicking off the series is Congressman Richard Gephardt of Missouri, a Democratic candidate. He's interviewed by national correspondent Helen Whalen.
The centerpiece of your campaign revolves around getting tough on trade. You would penalize countries that refuse to reduce their trade surpluses. Critics call this protectionist. You say it isn't. How do you avoid that perception that if you were elected president, you would cause a trade war?
Well, because it's not going to happen. The world has changed. Nobody can afford a trade war. We can't. Our trading partners can't either. And my trade amendment doesn't just say that we want to get rid of surpluses. It really says we want to get rid of unfair trade practices which cause surpluses. And so it really is aimed at getting other countries to open up their markets, to stop protecting their markets so that we can get in and sell our products. No one believes protecting the American market is a good policy.
What about the whole question of retaliation, though? You hear the critics say that they will retaliate, they will close up their markets to us.
They can't afford to do it. The Japanese made 100% of their profit in the auto industry in the American market last year. The last thing in the world that our trading partners want is to be foreclosed from the American market. So if they believe that our getting tough on trade is going to happen, then they will begin to open their market, which is what we're trying to get them to do.
But when you are quoted as saying that you consider the Japanese culturally and politically, quote, immature and corrupt, aren't those the kind of words that a trade war are made of?
I don't think so. I think that we need to deal with reality. The fact of the matter is the Japanese, the South Korean, the Taiwanese, and in some ways the European markets are much more closed than our market is, and part of the reason it is because of their background, their belief that they don't want to open their market. So I think we need to be realistic. We need to ask people to open their market. We need to help them get it done. I think they will.
On the issue of foreign policy, you have said that you co-sponsored a bill with Senator Kennedy that you would ask farmers to put aside part of their crops in the efforts of trying to push up prices. Isn't that the problem we have now, that the U.S. prices are too expensive and that's why we aren't selling abroad? No, what we find is that wherever our prices are, the foreign markets come right in below them because their costs of production are much less than ours. Actually, they'd like our price to go up too so they could get more for their products. What we need to do is to get the American farmer to be able to cover their cost of production through the marketplace rather than through subsidies from the government. And then we need to negotiate treaties with other countries to cut their supplies down so that we can get the worldwide price up, which would be good for everybody. What would you say to the argument that many people say that you are pandering to the farmers because of the Iowa caucus and that you are pandering to labor, that you're getting too much support from labor because of your trade stance? If I were pandering, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing. About half the farmers don't like my farm policy, and a lot of people in the country don't like my trade policy. So it's really a mixed bag throughout the country. But I'm doing what I believe in. I think these are good policies for the national interest, not for the interest of one group or another. They are controversial because they call for change over the status quo. But I think we need change. I think we need policies that fit the realities of today. Do you think that you could have a problem overall getting voters to vote for you because of your view that you want tax increases, you'd want to cut defense spending? That's the same thing that Walter Mondale wanted and he wasn't elected president? I think they'd support revenue increases as well as spending decreases in order to get the deficit down. You know, a huge deficit is really a huge tax on the American people in terms of high interest rates and a dollar that's too high so that we can't compete. The American people are interested in their bottom line. How are they going to do now and in the future? And I think they understand that getting rid of the deficit is more important than having the tax of a huge deficit on them. Thank you. I've been speaking with Representative Dick Gephardt, a Democratic presidential candidate.
Construction spending rose in May, but just barely, going up 0.3% from April's levels. The rise primarily reflected an upturn in construction of private, non-residential buildings, such as offices, hospitals, and hotels. But construction of residential buildings dropped for the second time this year, and public works projects also declined. Coming up, Adam Smith talks about the Korean economy's success story. The National Pasta Association says it expects the United States and the European community to reach an agreement next week calling for a reduction on European subsidies on pasta shipments to the U.S. The United States had set today as a deadline for that agreement, but agreed to put off any retaliatory moves until EC officials arrive in Washington for talks. The Europeans currently subsidize their pasta by about 18 cents a pound, and that subsidy has been declared illegal under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. The Senate today called on Japan to lift trade barriers that block the export of U.S. agricultural goods to that nation. The resolution, which passed unanimously, was attached to the trade bill now under consideration. In introducing that resolution, Congressman Pete Wilson said if Japan lifted those restrictions, the U.S. could sell another $2.5 billion worth of rice and citrus products a year. As Paul noted, Shearson Lehman Brothers today issued its 39th annual mid-year list of 10 uncommon values in common stocks. This year's portfolio of stocks, considered to be especially attractive by Shearson, includes Baker Hughes, Coastal Corporation, Cray Research, Hanson Trust, Hawley Group, McDonald's, Media General, NWA, Service Corporation International, and Tyco Labs. The inclusion of Hanson Trust and Hawley marks the first time the foreign stocks have been included in the list, and Tyco is the first stock to make a repeat appearance in 14 years. Now, it should be noted that last year's picks by Shearson have returned a disappointing 9.5% compared to a 21% appreciation for the Standard & Poor's 500. In tonight's commentary, Adam Smith, author and host of the PBS program Adam Smith's Money World, discusses why South Korea is becoming an economic power to be reckoned with.
South Korea has been in both the headlines and the TV news recently. The TV news in particular is very visual. Riot police in helmets that make them look like Darth Vader, carrying tear gas guns that look like The Empire Strikes Back. I used some of this tape myself in a recent show we did on Korea as one of the emerging, fast-growing economies in the world. A riot every night creates a bad impression, but is not a dictatorship because the cameraman is still there. You don't see riots on TV in Poland or East Germany or Czechoslovakia, and certainly not in the Soviet Union, because the cameraman wouldn't last 10 seconds. But the cameraman did last in Korea. Political troubles obscured for a moment what is really one of the great economic success stories in modern history. In 1965, Korea had an income of only $120 per person, the same as the Congo. In 20 years, that grew 50 times. Exports grew 100 times. GNP grew more than 9% a year. Now the GNP is equal to Argentina, a far richer country, and ahead of Portugal and Poland. Korea vaulted in one generation from medieval times to at least a semi-modern state, and it must be galling for Korea's leaders who grew up when times were hard to watch students riot who never knew the tough old days. How did the Koreans do it? Hard work. They work 55 hours a week, the highest in Asia, and they have a passion for education. More Koreans are literate than are Americans. 98% in Korea compared to 90% here. That is the single most stunning figure I learned. And with education and literacy and hard work, the Koreans were able to go from subsistence farming to building computers and cars and aircraft panels. Korea does not have a long tradition of democracy. It was a Japanese colony from 1910 to 1945. But with some restrained help from friends like us, the Koreans may now achieve both an economic miracle and, more important, a political one. At least we should hope so. I'm Adam Smith.
Recapping tonight's top stories, Toshiba's top executives stepped down in a last-ditch attempt to keep Congress from enacting punitive measures against the company.
The Bulls make a last-ditch attempt to start the third quarter on the plus side, but fail as the Dow Jones Industrial Average loses more than 8 3/4 points to close at 2409.76.
Looking ahead to tomorrow, we'll report on the first economic report for June on the state of unemployment. And now with tonight's last word, here's Paul.
Harley-Davidson, the domestic motorcycle maker that almost went under in the face of Japanese competition a few years ago, is known for making noise. And Harley didn't exactly make a quiet entrance today as its stock began trading on the New York Stock Exchange under the symbol HDI. New York correspondent Neil Cavuto reports.
As stock introductions go, this one literally rumbled right down Wall Street. Harley-Davidson was going big time to the big board. Good news for Harley-Davidson, even better news for the ever status-conscious New York Stock Exchange.
That's why we go through ceremonies like that.
A little too much pizzazz?
Oh, no. You can never have too much pizzazz.
Whether influenced by Phelan or not, glitzy stock introductions are clearly the rage these days. Take Fruit of the Loom's flashy opening on the floor of the American Exchange back in March, or comedian Dan Aykroyd's pitch for the public opening of the Hard Rock Cafe in April, or Walt Disney's Gala 50th anniversary celebration in January on the big board floor, or Conrail's highly touted public trading debut with Transportation Secretary Elizabeth Dole on hand. Now, it used to be that when stocks were introduced on the New York Stock Exchange, or indeed for that matter on any exchange, it was a quiet press announcement kind of event. There were no splashy scenes. That has changed in the last couple of years. The idea being what looks flashy now might translate into a flashy stock performance later on.
I'm not an expert in the stock market. Let's hope it goes up.
Does it affect your judgment on the company or the stock?
Not really, no.
But nice to look at?
Yeah, it's fun.
It should be noted that while flashy openings almost always are greeted with heavy stock buying, analysts say that initial luster soon fades. Then it's simply back to the far less sexy fundamentals. In New York, Neil Cavuto for the Nightly Business Report.
Hardly any action in the stock today. It closed at 19 3/8, unchanged.
That's it for this edition of the Nightly Business Report for Wednesday, July 1st. For all of us, good night.
The Nightly Business Report is made possible by Kidder Peabody. Our over 120 years of investment experience is an arch to build upon, serving the financial needs of individuals, corporations, and governments. Kidder Peabody, professionalism worldwide. By Digital Equipment Corporation, with its new generation of VAX family computers, connecting headquarters, branch offices, production and research centers into a single integrated computing environment. Digital has it now. And public television stations across the nation. For a transcript of this program, please send $3 check or money order to NBR Transcripts, P.O. Box 12724, Overland Park, Kansas 66212. Please include the date of the broadcast.